Bibliophiles of the internet, my name is Adri, and today I'm here to wrap up the books I read in the most recent round of the Queer Lit Readathon. If for some reason you're new here and don't know, the Queer Lit Readathon was created by my friends Kathy and Rogan, and it's a week-long event where you read queer books. They have 2 full rounds every year and 2 mini rounds which are called Queer Weekends. I will link their channels as well as Jean's channel down below because she was the guest host for this round, and also Rogan's website where you can find all the information about this round and any future Queer Lit events. As of filming this, the Queer Lit Readathon just wrapped its 7th round. I completed like 5.5 books technically, and this is what my bingo board looked like by the end of the week, and I will try to remember to share which books went with each prompt. The first book I finished was Ace, What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society, and the Meaning of Sex by Angela Chen, read by Natalie Nadas. Angela Chen is an Asian American queer asexual journalist, and this book is pretty much what it says on the tin. It's a deep dive, big picture overview of how compulsory sexuality harms and limits asexual people, and how asexuality challenges societal norms. It's part memoir, part anecdotal research, part academic research that aims to validate and explore asexuality as well as how it intersects with different experiences like gender, disability, and race. Content warnings for explorations of acephobia, references to domestic terrorism and massacre, some references to sex acts, reported racial slurs, discussions of rape and rape culture, and some mentions of ableism and forced sterilization. I want to start by saying that this is one of the best books I've ever read, fiction or nonfiction. Obviously it doesn't cover everything because every topic could easily be its own book, but it's still so incredibly thorough and thoughtful in how it celebrates asexuality. This book so clearly comes from a place of liberation, and I love that Angela Chen understands that true liberation isn't about foisting labels and language onto people who don't want them, but to arm people with the information they need in order to understand all of their choices, including the choice to not make a choice. I'm aro ace myself, and I really connected to all the ways she explores how asexuality and also aromanticism are often equated with being broken in some way, simply because sexuality is so strongly coded into our social and cultural norms, especially in the West. Erroneously, asexuality is thought of as people who lack sexual attraction, but as Angela Chen explores in her research, sexual attraction is not a missing puzzle piece. It's also that we're more expansive in how we find, express, and define pleasure and fulfillment. And the book also acknowledges that, just like anything else, asexuality is not monolithic. There's ace people who participate in sex and kink, there's ace people who are in relationships with allo people, there's ace people with no relationship to or interest in sex, there's ace people who are parents. There are no limits to the ways that we can exist. One of my favorite parts in the book is where Angela Chen says that contradictions and complexities do not negate the existence of identity, and ace people, just like any other queer community, are not obligated to explain away or account for those contradictions. People want asexuality to be simple. They want it to be defined in a way that centers allonormativity, as if everything in the world doesn't already do just that. But just because it's not simple doesn't mean it's not real, especially when there's often so much to unpack that keeps people from being able to claim their aceness. That's why I really appreciate the conversation about intersectionality, about how transness, culture, disability, and mental health can overlap with asexuality and make it that much harder to recognize, because there are so many more layers to wade through than people might think. I also love how this book breaks down the different kinds of attraction, romantic, sexual, sensual, aesthetic, so on and so forth, and shows how specificity of language can feel overwhelming on the surface, but it's actually a tool for excavating and understanding our experiences. Most importantly, this book talks about how language is a gift, how there's power in naming and understanding our experiences, how language and labels exist to help us find community and resources first and foremost, but also how language exists to serve us. If the language feels limiting, confusing, or doesn't fit your own experience, it can be discarded at any point. But if providing more language and more context helps people feel less broken and less alone, and liberates people from feeling like they're failures for not wanting the things Western society claims we all should want, that's a good thing. That gives people more choices. I have to stop there because there's no way I'm going to cover everything in this book, which I found to be incredibly validating, cathartic, and brilliant. I will say that I wish the disability chapter focused a little bit more on the experiences of disabled aces rather than being split between disability and how the medical industry seeks to brand asexuality as an illness, because I think those are 2 very different topics, but I still love listening to this and I gave it 5 stars. For the bingo board, this checks off the challenges for intersectional, underrepresented identity, recommended, and 40% plus BIPOC. And you're going to see that 40% plus BIPOC square come up quite a bit because every single book I read was either by or about BIPOC. After that, I finally got a chance to read Meet Cute Diary by Emery Lee. Emery Lee is an openly queer trans author who uses EM pronouns. This is her debut about a triracial trans boy named Noah who really wants to give hope to trans folks. So he runs this blog called Meet Cute Diary, which is a collection of trans happily ever after stories. But all the stories are fake. Suddenly, an online troll is threatening to expose both Noah and the blog, but at the same time, Noah meets a very cute bookseller who happens to be a fan of the blog and offers to fake date Noah so that they can fabricate proof to fend off the haters and also generate content to keep the blog afloat. Content warnings for brief mention of past suicide ideation, some misgendering, cyberbullying, and online harassment, brief descriptions of vomit, brief reference to bullying and transphobia, underage drinking, divorce, gaslighting, toxic relationships, and panic attacks. If I could have read this book all in one sitting, I would have. It's really fast-paced, it's as fun and lighthearted as it is disastrous, and I think it has a really sweet romance, which may not be the romance mentioned in the synopsis. But I can definitely see this book as being polarizing, not because of its quality, but because I can already hear people writing off Noah as an unlikable character, and guess what? He is. Noah is a total diva. He's short-sighted and selfish, he's stubborn, and he might even have a little itty-bitty baby god complex. Obviously, he starts the story with a lot of room to grow, and I think that's what's important. He learns a lot over this summer. He makes a lot of mistakes. He not only hurts people, but is hurt by people, and I think he's not the same person by the end of the book. I appreciate how the story showcases and celebrates underrepresented facets of transness without the story having to be about coming out or transness. Noah is a newly out trans boy. He is not passing, and he never talks about if he wants to pass, and he's also pre-T, pre-op, pre-everything, and again, the story never once talks about whether he's interested in medical transition because that's not required, and also that's not relevant to his current experience. And yes, please normalize trans people simply being trans because we identify as trans. And I don't think it's a spoiler to say that the endgame romance is a T for T romance, which is a huge deal for a traditionally published queer book. In case you don't know, T for T is shorthand for a trans person in a relationship with one or more partners who are also trans. Like other people have said, this is the summery, fluffy, tropey trans rom-com we deserve, and that doesn't mean the characters don't face hardship or transphobia, just that those hardships are not centered as the most important or even the most interesting parts of the book. But what struck me the most is how all this drama with Noah's blog is so deeply connected to all of Noah's own internal issues. When someone threatens to expose his blog as fake, that feels like a direct attack on his own experience and personhood, and it parallels how trans people are often burdened with having to prove our transness. And the way he runs Meet Cute Diary also reflects his own issues with intimacy and romance. He's willing to put himself at a distance where it's more comfortable to write these quick, inconsequential meet cute stories while never having to be bothered about what a relationship actually looks like after the meet cute. Noah is afraid to put himself in that space to even imagine what a romantic relationship looks like, because not only does romance potentially become fraught when you factor in transness, but also because a successful, long-lasting relationship takes work. Noah is someone who is in love with the idea of love, but he doesn't actually know how to show and express love for the people in his life, but also for himself, and that's something he's being forced to confront. And I think in a way, the story also explores the demands and expectations that come with trans visibility, especially in online spaces. Once Noah starts posting these fake pictures with him and Drew, suddenly that becomes the only thing his followers want from him. They demand more posts, more pictures, more updates, and whether they realize it or not, more performance. It shows the pros and cons of that experience, I think, because obviously when people feel represented, it evokes a really powerful response and creates a culture of validation. But at the same time, that hunger for representation can put unnecessary expectations on trans people and reduce us to only our transness. I really appreciate that conversation, and I also love how Noah is learning that one trans person alone can never hope to celebrate or even understand all the facets of transness, and that it will never be the job of only one person to tell and share our stories. I'm gonna stop myself there because there's more to this book than I can possibly squeeze into one review. My one critique is that I wish the endgame romance had a slightly healthier power dynamic, because I think Noah could very easily slip back into some toxic bad habits, but again, I appreciate that he at least gets to a better place, so I still gave this one 4.5 stars. For the bingo board, this one crosses off M-spec because Noah is bisexual, also intersectional, summer vibes, underrepresented identity because Noah is triracial and his endgame love interest is genderqueer, and of course 40% plus by POC. Then I read one of my most anticipated releases of 2021, and that was Volume 1 of Boys Run the Riot by Keito Gaku. Keito Gaku is an openly trans, specifically trans mask trans mangaka, which is something we hardly ever get to see for sadly understandable reasons, and this series is about a trans masc main character. It was translated by a trans masc person and localized by an entirely trans team. I'm just going to give you a second to let that sink in. As I said, it's about Ryo, who's a trans teenager, but he's not able to be publicly out, so he splits the difference by letting his clothing express who he really is. He's super into streetwear specifically, and one day when he's shopping at a pop-up store, he runs into this mean-looking, grumpy, intimidating new transfer student who happens to be in his class. The two of them end up bonding over their shared street aesthetic, and the other boy, Jin, suggests that they start their own streetwear brand as a big fuck you to societal norms and as a way to make other people feel comfortable and badass in their own skin. Content warnings for explorations of gender dysphoria, misgendering, bullying, harassment, some physical assault, and sexist slurs, some depictions of unsafe binding, and brief images of menstruation. This is one of my new favorite series, and it brings me so much joy. I connected so strongly with this story, not because Ryo's experience is anything like mine, but because streetwear plays such a strong role in his own experience of gender euphoria, and that has also been my experience. When I was rebuilding my own wardrobe, I bought from a lot of streetwear brands, and I still do because I find those brands to be the most expressive, the most genderless, the most inclusive, and the most stylish brands as compared to mainstream brands that dominate the market. In case you don't know, streetwear is a style of casual clothing that blends all kinds of aesthetics from hip-hop to surf culture and punk and skate styles and sportswear and anything in between that you would see on the street. It is distinct from fast fashion, which is highly unsustainable and toxic, and I encourage you to research that, but streetwear is often made by independent artists and designers and companies. Streetwear has been, in my own experience, a safe, affordable, accessible way to explore and express gender in a way that makes me feel connected to my community, and I think streetwear by definition is about making your own space and your own market when you fit outside of the mainstream, and I think this series really gets that. At the end of the day, it's about a group of friends who are finding their purpose and finding each other after being written off as misfits. At first, they feel ostracized because they don't fit in and because they've been told that who they are and what they want and what they like isn't important, and they're gradually realizing that their power actually comes from their difference. Especially when you're looking at it from a branding perspective, what's different and what's unique is what sells and what makes you distinctive on the market. And when you're making streetwear, you're trying to make something bold and exciting that doesn't already exist. And again, the streetwear market is about celebrating what's outside of the mainstream. These characters have been made to feel like their dreams and desires are worthless just because they don't line up with the traditional trajectory of adulthood. So what if they're not traditionally beautiful or passing? So what if they're not good at school? So what if they're not willing to conform? So what if they're not good at blending in? Streetwear embraces and welcomes that. There's a great coming out scene with Jin, who's super supportive, a growing cast of really great characters, and also a realistic and informative look at what it takes to build and run your own small business. I'm very excited to see where this series goes. I think it has a lot of potential and promise. I've already pre-ordered volume 2, and I gave this 5 stars. For the bingo board, I used this for my free space, which I designated as Trans Masc, also shorter than a novel, brings you joy, not set on your continent, intersectional, and 40% plus by POC. I'm also realizing I forgot to mention that Meet Cute Diary could also count towards that free space. Then I did miss the release date by a hair's breadth, but I did in fact get to read my arc of Hola Papi, How to Come Out in a Walmart Parking Lot and Other Life Lessons by John Paul Bramer. John Paul Bramer is a queer, biracial, Mexican-American artist, writer, and advice columnist, and this is his memoir in which he explores his own experiences of coming into queerness and writing and how he taps into that when giving advice. Content warnings for some peripheral ableism, mentions of fatphobia, homophobia, both internal and external, and homophobic slurs, bullying and death threats, allusions to suicide, and some descriptions of suicide attempts, some violence, HP references, references to eating disorders, racism and racial slurs, some descriptions of sex, exploration of toxic relationships, and some instances of sexual assault. This recently came out on June 8th from Simon & Schuster. It quickly became one of my new favorite memoirs because it's incredibly funny and self-aware, but it also doesn't shy away from difficult and complex topics. The chapters are formatted as common questions the author might get from wayward queer folks trying to figure out their lives, and he uses that as a jumping off point to parse the larger question of who he is and what qualifies him to hand out advice to strangers on the internet. So it's really an exploration of how we define authority and JP's own experience with feeling like he wasn't enough to claim that authority in his own life life growing up. Of course, now people project this air of all-knowing wisdom upon him when in fact his own path and the reclamation of his personhood was anything but clear-cut. I appreciate how he recognizes that the past can be both a foundation upon which the present is made possible and also a complex and heartbreaking mystery that only reveals itself to you once you have the experience and language to understand it. Reading this was an incredibly personal experience for me as a queer Latinx person in a way that I don't think is necessarily going to map onto the way other people read it, and I want to be very clear about that. It's a book that did not let me hide from myself. There were times where I had to put it down and just sit with myself like, oh, that's what that was. Oh, that's what that meant. Even though our experiences are virtually nothing alike, I felt like so much of myself was revealed to me in a way I can't quite express. It's so powerful the way the author is sharing his own stories, but then always turns the words back to the reader in a way that shows that he's writing these stories for us. So again, it all fits back into this big picture question about authority, and a common theme across every chapter is the unending, quintessentially human search for validation. We all want someone to see us and tell us that what we've gone through and what we've felt is real and enough, and that the mistakes we've made are leading to something better, and we will contort ourselves in so many ways just to get that. And in a way, this memoir is providing a safe form of validation that says it's okay to be messy, it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to not know what you're supposed to do next or who you are. Your life is not meaningless just because you don't have all the answers. It is so hard to write personal nonfiction in a way that still is able to reach back and connect the personal to the universal, to make your stories feel like the audience's stories, and I feel like this book does exactly that. I do think some of the essays towards the end lose a little bit of narrative momentum, but I still deeply love this memoir, and I gave it 4.5 stars. For the bingo board, this covers memoir, intersectional, recommended because I heard great things about it from Lupita at Lupita Reads, and 40% plus by POC. And then in the 11th hour, I decided to also pick up Given Volume 5 by Kizu Natsuki. I'm gonna keep this brief because it's the 5th volume in a series, but basically Given is about this talented, hot-headed guitarist named Onoyama who one day comes across a boy named Mafuyu cradling a guitar with broken strings. Not quite knowing what to do, he offers to help restring this guitar and learns in the process that not only does Mafuyu not actually know how to play, but he also has this innate gift for music and an incredibly powerful singing voice. Onoyama invites Mafuyu to join his band, and basically they're able to explore and express grief, loss, and their love through music. Overall in the series there are content warnings for explorations of death, suicide, and grief, references to child neglect and parental abandonment, some descriptions of sexual assault, and some explorations of toxic relationships and abuse. Again, I'm not going to say too much about this, but I will say that if you've seen the Given movie, that pretty much covers volumes 4 and 5 almost beat for beat, so I can now confirm that the movie is actually very truthful and faithful to the original series. That being said, volumes 4 and 5 are not my favorites because I think they pull focus from the main premise of the story to focus on a secondary couple, and while I initially liked that secondary couple, they have since proven to be quite toxic. Thankfully, they seem to have come to a slightly better place, although that relationship is still pretty much tainted for me, and it seems like the story is thankfully going to shift focus back to the main characters in volumes 6 and 7. But this is still one of my favorite series. It's emotional, it's angsty, it's heartbreaking, but it's also powerful in how it innately understands the cathartic healing power of music. I've said it before, but far and above everything else, that's my favorite thing about this series. I love that music acts as a vehicle for these characters to examine, explore, and express the difficult things they've been through in life, and they're able to process and heal because of what they collectively create. This series never fails to impress me with how it visually communicates how music feels, which seems like it should be impossible because music is a completely different artistic medium, and yet when you see these characters surrendering to music, you can feel it. I'm gonna stop because I love Given. You know I love Given. I'm super excited to see how the series continues and concludes because I think there's still plenty of room for the characters and the band to grow, and I gave this 4 stars. For the bingo board prompts, this one satisfied, again, shorter than a novel, not set on your continent, intersectional, and 40% plus by POC. I also want to quickly mention a book I finished, but I'm not going to review yet because I'm going to wait to collect my thoughts after I finish the series, but that would be Blue Flag Volume 7 by Kaito. It's a queer slice of life manga series that tackles really tough questions about being closeted, queerness, what it means to be happy, what it means to have a future, what it means to live in a society, especially one that is both collective and conservative. So I counted it for the hard-hitting contemporary prompt because that's exactly what it is. So those are all the books I read for this round of the Queer Lit Readathon. It was another fantastic round and I really enjoyed it. If you took part yourself, let me know what you read in the comments down below, or if you weren't able to join, tell me about the last queer book that you read. But that's everything I had for this mini wrap-up today. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.